Ladies and gentlemen, it's year 2020, and what better way to start the year than watching a video on newer features of JavaScript version ES2020. Believe me, there are some really cool features out there that you may already have in your browser, and there are some features that are coming up soon. And if you're watching this video much later in 2020 or later time, you already have those features, so you can use it right now. And it's always important, I believe, as a developer, to keep up with the newer features so you can make your code faster, cleaner, compatible with latest standard. And also, if somebody asks you in an interview about some of those features, you can answer them. So you're always ready. So welcome everybody to year 2020. And if you haven't subscribed my channel, please do so you can get all the new cool videos. And welcome to TechSy Tutorials. So one of the first features we're going to look at is called globalThis, and it is what it sounds like. It's a globalThis. You must be wondering, why do we need globalThis? We already have Windows, right? So let's look at why do we need this. Okay, so if I go into CodePen and console log window, I would get window, which is correct. I can also do the same thing. And instead of window, if I use self, and I would get the same object, which is window. And I can also do frames and run it. And I also get reference to the window object. And I can also do this. So these are all the globals. This is basically nothing but because I'm running this keyword in a global space, that's why it's giving me the window, because that's what. So all of these reference to the same window object. Now, if you're using web worker, only self would work. So for that, you would need to use self. And let's say if you're using Node.js, there they have a separate object called global. So you cannot use window for Node.js. So what JavaScript is trying to do is they wanted to have a common global that works across all the platform and different places. So they created something called globalThis. So if I do globalThis, again, if it doesn't work on your browser right now, I mean, it should, but if it doesn't work, if you have a latest version of Chrome, it should work right now as of today. So this is not a huge feature, but it's an important one to standardize globalThis. The second feature that was introduced in ES2020 is called Promise.allSettled, another function in promises that allows us to find out if all the promises that you want to execute have been settled. So let's look at it. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to create our first promise. So I'm going to call it P1, and it's going to be a short code. So I'm going to say promise, and usually there is resolve and reject. And instead of doing something, I'm just going to have a set timeout. And this set timeout could either reject or resolve. So I'm just going to resolve by default. So it waits for certain milliseconds and it resolves itself. And let's wait for a short time, 200 milliseconds. So it's less than a second. Okay. So this promise is guaranteed to be resolved after you call it within 200 milliseconds. We can have another promise. Let's call it P2, and this one we're just gonna reject, and this will take, let's say, 300 milliseconds. This is P2, and then we can have another promise, and this one we are going to resolve, And this is going to take, let's say, 4 seconds, which means 4,000 milliseconds. So overall, it will take 4 seconds to resolve or reject all 3 promises. So now let's see how to write the all settled. So we can say promise.allSettled, and this would obviously take an array with all 3 promises, so P1, P2, and P3. And what happens when they're finished? Remember, settle means either it can be resolved or rejected, but when all 3 are done. There is another function in Promise called promise.all, which is quite different than this one, because in promise.all, they all 3 have to be resolved. Then only this will resolve. Otherwise, it would, as soon as the first promise is rejected, it will give you an error. But in promise.allSettled, it will wait for all 3 promises to be either resolved or rejected, and then it would give you the final status. So this would say then, and inside, all I'm just going to do is just print all the statuses. So for that, I can simply do, this would have results, right? So with the results, I can do for each, and which would give me each result. And then I can simply console log the result. So let's see how it works. It will wait till 4 seconds actually, because that's the maximum. And then I will get 3 statuses: fulfill, rejected, and fulfill, because the first one is fulfilled, the second one is rejected, and the third one is fulfilled. But it gives me the status when all 3 are either resolved or rejected. So if you have a case where you need this kind of feature, now you have. All right, the next feature is pretty important. I've been waiting for this operator for a long time. It's called Nullish Coalescing Operator. Is this actually this double equal sign? So this is a typical problem in JavaScript. Let's say if I have an object X where I have a profile, and the profile has, let's say, name. Let's call it John. And it also has age, 21. So John is 21. So this is an object, simple object. Okay, so oftentimes you have to do something like this, where you have to say, print the name of this object, right? So I can say x.profile.name, and it would print John. What if that doesn't exist? So there are cases where you may not have this. So let's print that first. So if I say console log x.profile.name. I'll just name, and if I run this, it would print John. But what if I just remove this property altogether, and now if I run this, it would give me undefined. So I can say, okay, if there is no name, then there is an operator called, it's a double pipe, where I can say if, then provide some default value, which is John. And now if I run this, then even though there is no John, it says if this is undefined, then give the value as John. So what it does, it checks if it's an empty value. Now the problem with JavaScript is there are a lot of different kind of empty value. Undefined is one of them. What if I have something like this, name, and it's simply empty string. Now, if I run it now, it still gives me John. So it thinks that empty string is an empty value, which you don't want to consider empty value. Empty string is an empty string, which is a string. It's not an empty value. So you should give actually an empty string here, not John. Same thing with age. So I can do something like this. I can say profile.age. So if there is no age provided, then I want it 21. And if I take age out of the picture and run this, it would say John and 21. If I put this back, and let's say age is 0, which is actually a valid age, a valid number. So it should actually give me 0 because it's not null or undefined. Now if I run this, it gives me John and 21. So this is the case where I don't want to this second value after the pipe. I actually want to print the value that is actually in the object, which is empty string and 0. So until now, what you had to do is you would have to say if the name is undefined or null, then make it John. Otherwise, just keep the value, which is whatever it is, right? So pipe operator is nice, but it doesn't really solve the problem. I've seen a lot of issues related to this in the code. A lot of inexperienced programmer make this mistake. So instead of pipes, you can now use double question mark. And this will only execute when it's actually empty value, which is undefined or null. So if I run this, obviously it's going to give you an error because as of 2020, it's not there. But you can actually use it in your code because Babel has it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use preprocessor as Babel, then clear this and run this. And now it's actually giving me the right answer, which is empty string and 0. Now if I take all of these out, which means profile doesn't have anything, in this case is actually undefined. So it should give me John and 21, which it should now. So this is a pretty important feature, and I've been waiting for this feature for a long time. JavaScript also introduced another operator called optional chaining operator. It's a question mark and a dot. And this is also a pretty cool feature. Okay, so let's also look at the same example. In this case, if I do console log, let's say I'm going to remove the age from here. And if I do console log x dot profile dot age, and then it's not going to give me error. It will give me basically undefined. But what if I don't have even profile? Okay, I only have x. And if I run this, it will give me an error. It says cannot read property age of undefined. So if you have like a 2 level of undefined, then it would give you an error, which could be an issue, right? So oftentimes when I don't know if object has a property and that property has also another property, I would write something like this. And there are cases where x doesn't even exist. So you can write something like this. I can say if x is there, then you would say n. You can use an n operator. And if x exists and it has a property called profile, and it has x dot profile dot name. So this here, it would print if x exists and x has a property called profile and profile has a property called name, then it's going to print the property name. If I clear this and run this, this will not give me an error. It will give me undefined, but it doesn't give me an error. Now, if I add a property called profile and leave it empty, it would give me undefined, right? And now, if I do name, let's say John, and run this, then it, hold on, oh, I forgot over here. If I run this now, it gives me John. So this is pretty solid. The only problem is I have to write this X and the X. So if it's a deep object, I have to write all these properties, right? JavaScript introduced a new operator that would solve this issue. So I'm just going to write in a second line, which makes it much cleaner. So I would write X and then that new operator, which is question mark and a dot. And then I would say next property. So I don't have to really put all the previously used. So I can say profile and then question mark and a dot name, which means these are optional. If it doesn't exist, don't give me an error. Okay. So if I run this, they both would give me John. And if I remove, let's say if X doesn't have any properties, and if I run this, then they both would give me undefined. So this is almost same as this, but it's much a cleaner way of doing this. The question mark makes it optional. That's what it is basically. And again, I have to use Babel to do this. It won't work. It will work in, I think, Chrome 80, which is the next version, has already implemented it. So it should be available in a month or so. All right, the last but not least, JavaScript also introduced something called BigInt. Okay, so let's look at why do we need BigInt. So JavaScript has only one type of number, which is called number, right? It has a limit. So it has a sort of like a distinction between integer and a double or floating point. So, and to check the value, so I can say const max value, for example, equal to, if I use number dot max underscore safe integer, this gives me the kind of like a largest possible integer value that I can use in JavaScript. So if I console log this, max, and I run this, I would get this value, which is 90071992547 blah blah blah, and the length of this number is actually 16, so it allows max 16. What if I have a number that is bigger than this and if I want to use it in JavaScript? I cannot really use it. It becomes completely unpredictable. So for example, if I do, so let's say if I want to do max plus 1 and max plus 2, let's see what it gives me. It gives me the same number for both. And it's kind of weird. Sometimes you get the right value, sometimes you don't get the right value, and it's very unpredictable. So I would not even use it after this particular integer. JavaScript introduced this called something called BigInt, which helps you do that. And so the way to use it is, let's use it, let's call it big 1. Okay, even though 1 is not big, but I'm going to define 1 as a big integer. So I can use 1, and then I would have to use n after this. And this means this is a big integer. Okay, now if I want to add 1 to it, then I would have to also use big integer so that it makes sense. And this feature, I think, is already available in Chrome. So if I inspect it, I would get this one, which is 1 plus 1 would give me 2, but it would always give you this end notation, which means addition of big number on another big number is also another big number. I believe if I just do this, I may get some weird stuff. I think it may not even let me add it. Yeah, you see, kind of mix big integer and other type. I may actually create another video on a big integer itself if you want to use this. But this is more like an introduction of how to, what it is. Okay. Another thing is if you want to convert from another data type to a big integer, in that case you would have to use, you cannot use this. You have to use something called a constructor. You would say big int, and let's say if it's an empty value or a string 1. Okay, and I can console log big 1, and this would basically convert this 1 into the big integer 1. So right now it's a string, actually, one string, right? So we'll convert into a big integer 1. I would have to actually inspect. Somehow CodePen console doesn't do justice. Now I can see 1n. Let's say if I do false here, which means 0, it will automatically convert false into 0 and 0 into big integer, which is 0n. Okay. So that's all, folks, on ES2020. By the way, I have 2 Udemy courses, one on JavaScript and one on React hooks. These are latest comprehensive courses, so you can get it if you need. Usually they're like on discount all the time on Udemy, but if you need a discount code, please email me and I will give you, and you will get it for like a $9.99. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter. You can check out the GitHub. You can translate this video for me. The instruction is in the description of the video, and you can also become my Patreon. Thank you.